At Chipotle, we also have a playlist. Guacamole as it's being hand mashed, the sizzle of adobo chicken on the grill, the chopping of onions and cilantro. We call our playlist Real. Order now. Chipotle, for real.
This podcast is brought to you by TeamTrade, a digital solution that helps you hire, optimize, and retain employees. Using psychometric assessments to identify more than 100 professional mindset traits, it gives instant reports you can use to build high-performing teams. Get 2 free profiles today, no commitment, no credit card required, at teamtrait.com. TeamTrait.com. Welcome to the Manage Smarter podcast with hosts C. Lee Smith and Audrey Strong. We're glad you're here for discussions on new ways to manage smarter, hire, develop, and retain talent, improve results, and propel team performance to new heights. This is the Manage Smarter podcast.
Lee, our guest today says taking a career break can be a transformative life event. And it could be a layoff. It could be, my company is doing sabbaticals now. There's different ways this can happen. Some of them I'm kind of freaked out about. I'm really anxious to hear what Laura has to say.
Yeah, I don't know that I'm wired to do that. I've never taken a vacation longer than a week. And even, when I'm in between projects, I'm always, can't get out of my head about can't wait to get on to the next thing and want to make sure that there's a next thing there, so that's going to be interesting. I can't wait to hear more.
I love this topic. We've never done it. So I want to welcome everyone to Manage Smarter, the show. We're so glad you're here. I'm Audrey Strong. I'm the Senior Vice President. Thanks for the promotion, Lee. That actually did happen, and I forgot. Of communications here at Sales Fuel.
And I'm C. Lee Smith. I'm the CEO and founder of Sales Fuel.
Okay, so Laura Nguyen is an experienced marketing executive and entrepreneur with an extensive background in data-driven marketing, digital marketing, and communications for Fortune 500 companies. Author of the book called Career Break Compass, Navigating Your Path to a Balanced Life Through Intentional Time Off. She's also a certified executive coach, helping mid-career high-achieving leaders go from burned out to balance through her coaching program and her online community. She's got a Bachelor of Arts and a Bachelor of Science from Truman State University and an MBA from Rochester Institute of Technology, coming to us live from her microphones in Des Moines. Laura, thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me. Excited to be here.
Okay, so what is the most common way that people take a break? Because a layoff to me doesn't seem like a fun time.
A lot of fun. Yeah.
Break.
Yeah.
Tell us more about the overall umbrella of this topic that you have.
Yeah. So career breaks were new to me too. So Lee, you were just talking about, I can't even imagine, like I've never taken more than a week off, right? I was the same. I actually worked during my vacations. Like, you always bring your laptop, right? Yeah. And you're like, oh, right before our family event, I'll just, log in for a little bit, take care of a few things. And so, slowing down and rethinking how you want to live and how you want to focus your time and energy was something that I had to learn. I had to unlearn a lot of the busyness that I had really become accustomed to. And so when I think about career breaks, I think about it in a way that is, Tim Ferriss talks about mini retirements, right? And for me, when I read the 4-hour workday and the 4-day work week and all of those types of things, my one challenge really came down to how do I make this feasible and sustainable for me? And when I think about breaks, it's not just about breaks in your day to day. It's also taking strategic breaks during your time off. So how are you using vacations in a more strategic way?
Oh, well, that makes sense. Lee,
yeah. So, I have so many questions about that. And the first one is going to be economic, right? So it's like, you take a break, from a job and everything like that, the spigot stops. What do you do?
Yeah. Let's talk about too, what are the types of breaks? I think most of us, and just what you were talking about, go right into, I'm going to quit my job and I'm going to have this extended amount of time away from work. And I'll be honest with you, that was really my thinking. I thought that was the only option that I could take. There's actually other different types of breaks that we can think about. So the first one is you could take a leave of absence. That could be a paid leave of absence through your work. I know a lot of folks who are struggling with burnout end up taking medical leaves of absence. And so you do have some short-term disability options that you can have some income for during that time period. The other piece that we think and talk about is sabbatical. So about 17% of organizations globally have a formal sabbatical program. Most of us don't talk about that, right? Or understand what our benefits are when we think about joining an organization. And so sabbaticals are also a way for us to consider, how do I think about the time that I have in my workplace? Maybe I work 5 years and then I have an extended amount of time that's paid during that sabbatical. The other is a layoff, which is, it's a break by circumstance and not necessarily a break by choice.
It's not voluntary, no.
Exactly, right? And so with that, one of the key things for us to think about is you typically have a severance package. You've got an amount, set number of weeks that you have for that time period. I don't say don't spend the entire, let's say 12 weeks of your severance period, in your break, but you can also be thoughtful about how you spend that time. So let's say, for example, your first 4 to 6 weeks, you're really being more thoughtful and intentional about, I'm going to recharge, I'm going to rebuild my confidence, and I'm going to ready myself for the interviews that take a lot of emotional toll for me to have those conversations again. And so that's how I really think about breaks. There's the voluntary and then there's the involuntary. But even in the voluntary breaks, there's quitting your job, there's a sabbatical program, and there's a leave of absence.
And buyouts right now. I mean, that's a big deal and a great opportunity to do exactly what you're talking about.
Yes, it's a way for us to be more thoughtful and intentional about, if I'm voluntarily taking advantage of these buyouts, how do I want to rethink how I want to work and how I want to live?
But in prepping for the show, there is a stigma to taking a break. You say overall it's viewed negatively. And if I were to go to Lee and say, hey, I'm really burned out and I want paid leave, and I think I would be subject to some negative scrutiny. How do you do this in a way that you don't get put on somebody's pegboard like, this isn't
Yeah,
one of my
basically,
top players.
how does that impact your career advancement?
Right.
Yeah. I think it's one of the big blockers. Like financial is typically the first blocker I hear when it comes to a break, right? The second becomes, what does it look like for my career trajectory and really my reputation and credibility I have within the organization. I think there's a few things we have to unpack with that, right? There's the one side of it, which is what do we think someone else is going to think about our decision? And then the other piece is, what do they really think about the decision? And so for those that I've worked with, that I've talked to and surveyed, I think the biggest blocker is an internal blocker versus an external one, meaning that we hold ourselves back from asking for the things that we need in fear of what others might think, but in reality, their mindset and their perspective may be completely different. So I've, multiple clients of mine have had those conversations with their managers. And even when I had my conversation with my manager, the feedback was, well, why don't you take, instead of leaving, why don't you, take a leave of absence? Why don't you take a sabbatical instead? So that way you could rest, recharge, and really think about how you want to come back to the organization in a way that's going to deliver more value, right? And so that's typically the feedback that I've actually had versus the opposite, which is, how is this hurting my career trajectory within the organization? And then I think the other piece that we have to think about is, what is our career plan within that organization, right? Well, we own our career. And so as we think about that, we also have to think through, what is the type of growth? What is the type of opportunity that I want to have within the organization? That might not be climbing the next, getting the next title change. It might be working on different types of projects, but some of that comes from taking a step away versus feeling that need to hustle so that we can get the next promotion.
I want to rewind this just a little bit. Like, how did you know when you needed to take a career break?
Yeah, Lee, that's, that question really is like the big question for me of when I started getting to this point of feeling extremely burnt out. And so I have always been someone that wanted to achieve a lot at work. I've always been someone who wants to make sure that I have high impact in the work that I do. And I've always loved managing teams. What I didn't do a great job of in my career was taking care of myself and being thoughtful about how I could help my own professional and career growth versus following a path that really was set for me as quickly as possible. But also, how can I make sure that I can be a strong leader and an effective leader in those high performing teams without hurting myself in the process? So I deprioritized myself in that midst of ensuring that my team was performing and feeling good and growing and doing all the things that great leaders are supposed to do. And so what happened for me, there were a few things. Personally, I had a kiddo, and the amount of sleep that I was having was completely eroded.
Mhm.
In full transparency. And sleep, what I learned is that sleep is the foundation of mental health. And I had been an insomniac before, throughout my career, but the challenge was with this added compounded pressure without the added support. I think that really created a challenge for me. And the other piece to it is, this was during the fact that this was in COVID, and I had, I had a lot of team members who left the organization that I was backfilling a ton of roles for, in addition to making sure that we were hitting goals and performing in the way that we needed to. And of course, the shift, right, from going in person to being completely remote. So that connectivity really was lacking for me. And so I think it all compounded into, really chronic burnout, which is the lack of connection with other people, the lack of growth, the lack of alignment within the values of my organization. And then just physically, I just wasn't taking care of me.
So looking back, did you miss any red flags that that burnout might be on the horizon for you, or in the people that you coach? Are there some warning signs that they frequently miss?
Yes, for sure. Right. I always thought like, oh, I would get sick. I'd have a headache. I'd have migraines. I'd have GI issues. Like that's just a part of, maybe it's my diet. Maybe I'm not eating well. I'm not drinking enough water. I always had excuses for the physical manifestations of stress in my body. So that really was the key one. The second was when I started skipping things. Like, it starts with skipping meals, then it goes to skipping workouts, then it goes to skipping family activities. And that started to really erode for me my own sense of, being connected to other people and purpose and value. So that was another sign for me that I really missed. And then I think the other sign that I really missed was I just thought this was normal, right? Like these feelings of being stressed and being really busy was just a normal feeling, and that this is just the way that life is. And it took some time for me to recognize that, for me to take that step back, a lot of my burnout were really, and unfortunately, some of it was my own decisions in contributing to it, as well as I think, overall the environment and corporations that we work for in a lot of ways.
Can you share with our listeners where they can measure their level of burnout? I believe you have a tool for that.
Yeah, on my website, Christina Maslock is a professor, and she has created this burnout inventory. And so that is on my website. It's a resource for people. It's an interactive resource for people to take. And it helps you understand what are your levels of burnout, and also in what areas, because I think that's another key piece that we think of. We often think that burnout is just simply from overwork, but in fact, burnout can also come from neglect. It can come from not feeling like I'm growing, I'm not developing, I'm not feeling connected. And so we have to also understand that it's not always overwork. There might be other factors that are driving your burnout as well.
I would think then people being in jobs where they're not a good fit, and it's sort of like drudgery to come to work there every day. But just the job and role that they're in could play a factor in that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we've all felt that, right? In some way, shape, or form, where you're in a role and, you feel like I could be contributing more value somewhere else, or this isn't really in my zone of genius. This isn't really maximizing my skills. And so then you start to disengage in a lot of ways, right? And that disengagement is disingenuous to yourself, but also isn't delivering the value to the organization. So I think there's definitely a relationship between a manager, a leader, and a direct report of how can we make sure that we're finding the right roles for the right people so that they can continue to, optimize and maximize themselves as well.
Because in that situation, it takes a lot more mental energy, just to come to work than to actually do your work. And, it can be very draining physically, and you're just exhausted by the end of the day, sometimes before the end of the day. Is that pretty much common in some of the people you coach?
Yes, right. And there is the energy. I always talk about how do you instead of time management, how do we optimize and manage energy, right? And so a lot of it is we're not self-aware enough to recognize, how am I feeling about a certain project? How am I feeling about a certain engagement, right? And tapping into some self-awareness is so key, right? That's the EQ side, the emotional intelligence side, is that self-awareness. We often forget. We often think about it as like the social side of it, and that is, I would say, the most important and starting point that I work with for folks is, how do we look at it from a periscope? I call it, I use these 5 Ps, and I say periscope as a way for us to look through some of the obstacles that we have, but also look within and identify what are the things that I want to make sure that I'm learning, growing, and owning, my own career growth in.
So the audience, obviously the show's called Manage Smarter. I'm a manager, and one of my reports comes to me and asks for a break. I heard you say, well, I should come back offering more value to my organization. What are some reasonable expectations that are fair that a manager should have in granting this request? Like,
Great
I'll
question.
let you do it, but when you come back, I want X, Y, and Z.
Yeah. I think there's a couple of things when someone asks for a break, right? Which is like, what is the type of break that they're looking for? So if it is an FMLA break, that's definitely a conversation that we need to have with HR, and pull HR into that conversation as well, because there's definitely a different level of need. Then there's the piece of granting a leave of absence for someone. And I think there's a few things that I think about in that process. One, which is, do they need the time to rest and recharge? They're a high performer. They continue to contribute. Maybe they took on a ton more work in the last year, and you're just now recognizing that they've dealt with a lot of change. Let's say that, previous layoffs within organizations, they've taken on additional teams and roles. They continue to be a stellar performer in terms of being able to deliver the quality work that they need. They're hitting their goals. And then in addition to that, they are always taking on more work. So those kind of 3 levers, you start to go, okay, this person just needs some rest and recharge time, right? And that's really that key. The next one goes, let's say that next situation, Lee, you were talking about, they might be in a role that might not be a good fit for them, and they are feeling taxed and they're feeling exhausted and depleted in that role. And having that candid conversation of, is this the right role for me? I don't know. I just need to take some time and step away and think about what that looks like. I think that's a conversation, and a vulnerable conversation, that an employee needs to have with their manager. And so I think that vulnerability should be rewarded in the sense of, let's open a dialogue, and yes, how about you take some time off and think about that? But I want you to use this time off to really think through, where do you want to grow in your career? What does that look like? And how can I help support you, whether that's within this organization or not in this organization, right? Like, I think that's the other key piece too.
I think that starts with acknowledging the fact that the employee was very brave and courageous to actually have that conversation, and acknowledging and celebrating that, making them feel good about it, so that then they'll open up a little bit more and not quite feel as so vulnerable. And it's, again, I had a situation where there's an employee actually very recently that we had been working really hard, and it was nonstop, kind of relentless. Some of the projects and everything like that we were giving to her. It's like I gave her a ski vacation. Yeah,
Love
so it's like I
that.
knew that I knew what she was interested in, and so Club Med, 5 days up in Quebec, and hopefully, now I just have to get her to take it.
Yeah. Well, I think that's really key that you talk about, which is, you knew what she was interested in. And I think oftentimes people feel underappreciated, and that becomes one of the drivers to burnout and their symptoms of disengagement within the organization, is they don't feel like they're appreciated by their leader. And that's not always the same. It's not one size fits all, right? Like, it's not always a pay increase. It's not always a title change. And for you were able to recognize, like, hey, she really loves skiing. I'm going to just take care of that for her. Now I need to just make sure that she takes it. But that was a very personalized way of appreciation.
Yeah. So your website is lauranguyen.co, right? And it's
Yes.
spelled Laura the regular way, but your last name is spelled Nguyen, everyone. Write that down. We have about a minute left. Lee, I'll let you have the last question.
Well, I mean, actually, you are a leader now, and you recognize that your company doesn't necessarily have a way for dealing with people who need to, work on their mental health and everything like that. So what's the first step, that a new leader or that any leader, quite frankly, would have in creating like a new sabbatical program or a new program that, a very valued leader that's been on the job for a certain period of time where it can actually, can take advantage of that. So how do you set up a program like that?
Yeah, I think the first step is getting the data, right? Understanding, especially you probably have, years of annual engagement survey data from your team. Start with what's the internal data you have around how are people feeling within their organization and their roles. The next goes, what's the external data that we're seeing in terms of retention, right? To be able to understand that. SHRM's got a ton of data that you can pull in and taking that. I'm a firm believer in the fact that we need to take both the qualitative and the quantitative side and building a business case around these types of programs. And so I always start with, what's the qualitative data and the quantitative data around that? And then start small, right? Typically it takes one employee that says, hey, I need something because I'm in this situation. And we might say, oh, this is a one case type of situation. But start that program there, allow them to have the time off, put some structure around it. My biggest thing is I see so many organizations create a program for employees where they're having a leave of absence, but the employee is completely left to their own devices. And during, say, that 8 to 12-week time period, sometimes they come back in worse shape because they didn't have the structure or the support that was needed. And so one of the key things that I always talk about is have them engage with some type of coach or therapist during that time off to help guide them through this journey, because they're going to go from having back-to-back meetings to a completely open calendar. And that is very jarring for someone. Mm-hmm. And so providing them with support during their break is the most important thing that you can do, not just allowing the break, but actually supporting them through that time.
That's great advice. The book, everybody, once again, Career Break Compass, Navigating Your Path to a Balanced Life Through Intentional Time Off. I'm so glad we got to book you because it was just this topic came in and I went, wow, this is a new one on me and it's very interesting. Laura, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. Appreciate it.
Great to have you.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the show, please rate and recommend on iTunes, Overcast, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also get more great information at salesfuel.com.
This podcast is a part of the C-Suite Radio Network. For more top business podcasts, visit c-suiteradio.com.